to another episode of Candlelight Readings. Tonight, we will be continuing our reading of some Celtic fairy tales. Once again, I ask for your forgiveness in any potential mispronunciations I may have of Celtic names or places. The story we'll be reading tonight is called Guleesh. There once was a boy in the county Mayo. Guleesh was his name. There was the finest rath of a little way off from the gable of the house, and he was often in the habit of seating himself on the fine grass bank that was running round it. One night he stood, half leaning against the gable of the house and looking up into the sky and watching the beautiful white moon over his head. After he had been standing that way for a couple of hours, he said to himself, "My bitter grief that I am not gone away out of this place altogether. I'd sooner be any place in the world than here. Oh, it's well for you, white moon," says he, "that's turning round as you please yourself, and no man can put you back. I wish I was the same as you." Hardly was the word out of his mouth when he heard a great noise coming, like the sound of many people running together, and talking and laughing and making sport, and the sound went by him like a whirl of wind, and he was listening to it going into the rath. "Musha, by my soul," says he, "but you're merry enough and I'll follow you." What was in it but the fairy host, though he did not know at first that it was they who were in it, but he followed them into the rath. It's there he heard the Fulparni and the Fulporn and the Fulporni and the Reilehuta and the Reilahubulia that they had there. Oh my goodness, I totally butchered that probably. And every man of them crying out as loud as he could, "My horse and bridle and saddle, my horse and bridle and saddle." "By my hand," said Guleesh, "my boy, that's not bad, I'll imitate you." And he cried out as well as they, "My horse and bridle and saddle, my horse and bridle and saddle." And on the moment there was a fine horse with a bridle of gold and a saddle of silver standing before him. He leaped up on it, and the moment he was on its back he saw clearly that the rath was full of horses and of little people going riding on them. Said a man of them to him, "Are you coming with us tonight, Guleesh?" "I am, surely," said Guleesh. "If you are, come along," said the little man, and out they went all together, riding like the wind, faster than the fastest horse you ever saw hunting, and faster than the fox and the hounds at his tail. The cold winter's wind that was before them, they overtook her, and the cold winter's wind that was behind them, she did not overtake them. And stop nor stay out of that full race did they make none, until they came to the brink of the sea. Then every one of them said, "High over cap, and that moment they were up in the air, and before Guleesh had time to remember where he was, they were down on dry land again, and were going like the wind. At last they stood still, and a man of them said to Guleesh, "Guleesh, do you know where you are now?" "Not a know," says Guleesh. "You're in France, Guleesh," said he. "The daughter of the King of France is to be married tonight, the handsomest woman that the sun ever saw, and we must do our best to bring her with us, if we're only able to carry her off. And you must come with us that we may be able to put the young girl up behind you on the horse when we'll be bringing her away, for it's not lawful for us to put her sitting behind ourselves. But you're flesh and blood, and she can take a good grip of you, so she won't fall off the horse. Are you satisfied, Guleesh, and will you do what we're telling you?" "Why shouldn't I be satisfied?" said Guleesh. "I'm satisfied, surely, and anything that you tell me to do, I'll do it without doubt." They got off their horses there, and a man of them said a word that Guleesh did not understand, and at the moment they were lifted up, and Guleesh found himself and his companions in the palace. There was a great feast going on there, and there was not a nobleman or a gentleman in the kingdom but was gathered there, dressed in silk and satin and gold and silver, and the night was was as bright as the day, with all the lamps and candles that were lit, and Guleesh had to shut his 2 eyes at the brightness. When he opened them again and looked from him, he thought he never saw anything as fine as all he saw there. There were 100 tables spread out, and they're full of meat and drink on each table of them, flesh meat and cakes and sweetmeats and wine and ale, and every drink that ever a man saw. The musicians were at the 2 ends of the hall, and they were playing the sweetest music that ever a man's ear heard, and there were young women and fine youths in the middle of the hall, dancing and turning and going round so quickly and so lightly that it put a suran in Guleesh's head to be looking at them. There were more there playing tricks, and more making fun and laughing, for such a feast as there was that day had not been in France for 20 years, because the old king had no children alive but only the 1 daughter, and she was to be married to the son of another king that night. 3 days the feast was going on, and the 3rd night she was to be married, and that was the night that Guleesh and the Sheogus came, hoping, if they could, to carry off with them the king's young daughter. Guleesh and his companions were standing together at the head of the hall, where there was a fine altar dressed up, and 2 bishops behind it waiting to marry the girl as soon as the right time should come. Now nobody could see the Sheogs, for they said a word as they came in that made them all invisible, as if they had not been in it at all. "Tell me which of them is the king's daughter," said Guleesh, when he was becoming a little used to the noise and the light. "Don't you see her there away from you?" said the little man that he was talking to. Guleesh looked where the little man was pointing with his finger, and there he saw the loveliest woman that was, he thought, upon the ridge of the world. The rose and the lily were fighting together in her face, and one could not tell which of them got the victory. Her arms and hands were like the lime, her mouth as red as a strawberry when it is ripe. Her foot was as small and as light as another one's hand. Her form was smooth and slender, and her hair was falling down from her head in buckles of gold. Her garments and dress were woven with gold and silver, and the bright stone that was in the ring on her hand was as shining as the sun. Guleesh was nearly blinded with all the loveliness and beauty that was in her, but when he looked again, he saw that she was crying, and that there was the trace of tears in her eyes. "It can't be," said Guleesh, "that there's grief on her when everybody's round her is so full of sport and merriment." "Mushavin, she's grieved," said the little man, "for it's against her own will she's marrying, and she has no love for her husband she is to marry. The king was going to give her to him 3 years ago, when she was only 15, but she said she was too young, and requested him to leave her as she was yet. The king gave her a year's grace, and when that year was up, he gave her another year's grace, and then another. But a week or a day he would not give her longer, and she is 18 years old tonight, and it's time for her to marry. But indeed," says he, and he crooked his mouth in an ugly way, "indeed it's no king's son shall marry, if I can help it." Guleesh pitied the handsome young lady greatly when he heard that, and he was heartbroken to think that it would be necessary for her to marry a man she did not like, or, what was worse, to take a nasty Sheog for a husband. However, he did not say a word, though he could not help giving many a curse to the ill luck that was laid out for himself, to be helping the people that were to snatch her away from her home and from her father. He began thinking then what it was that he ought to do to save her, but he could think of nothing. "Oh, if I could only give her some help and relief," said he. "I wouldn't care whether I were alive or dead, but I see nothing that I can do for her." He was looking on when the king's son came up to her and asked her for a kiss, but she turned her head away from him. Guleesh had double pity for her then, when he saw that the lad taking her by the soft white hand and drawing her out to dance. They went round in the dance near where Guleesh was, and he could plainly see that there were tears in her eyes. When the dancing was over, the old king, her father, and her mother, the queen, came up and said that this was the right time to marry her, that the bishop was ready, and it was time to put the wedding ring on her and give her to her husband. The king took the youth by the hand, and the queen took his daughter, and they went up together to the altar with the lords and great people following them. When they came near the altar, and were no more than about 4 yards from it, the little she-oak stretched out his foot before the girl, and she fell. Before she was able to rise again, he threw something that was in his hand upon her, said a couple of words, and upon the moment the maiden was gone from amongst them. Nobody could see her, for that word made her invisible. The little man seized her, and raised her up behind Guleesh, and the king, nor no one else saw them, but out with them through the hall till they came to the door. "Oro, dear Mary, it's there the pity was, and the trouble, and the crying, and the wonder, and the searching, and the rugan, and when the lady disappeared from their eyes, and without their seeing what did it. Out of the door of the palace they went, without being stopped or hindered, for nobody saw them, and 'My horse, my bridle and saddle,' says every man of them. 'My horse, my bridle and saddle,' says Guleesh. And on the moment the horse was standing ready caparisoned before him. Guleesh raised her up on the horse's back, and leaped up himself before her, and 'Rise, horse,' said he, and his horse, and the other horses with him, went in a full race until they came to the sea. 'High over cap,' said every man of them. 'High over cap,' said Guleesh, and on the moment the horse rose under him, and cut a leap into the clouds, and came down in Erin. They did not stop there, but went of a race to the place where was Guleesh's house in the rath, and when they came as far as that, Guleesh turned and caught the young girl in his 2 arms, and leaped off the horse. 'I call and cross you to myself, in the name of God,' said he, and on the spot, before the word was out of his mouth, the horse fell down, and what was in it but the beam of a plough, of which they had made a horse. And every other horse they had, it was that way they made it. Some of them were riding on an old besom, and some on a broken stick, and more on a boholawn, or hemlock stalk. The good people called out together when they heard what Guleesh said, 'Oh, Guleesh, you clown, you thief, that no good may happen to you. Why did you play that trick on us?' But they had no power at all to carry off the girl, after Guleesh had consecrated her to himself. 'Oh, Guleesh, isn't that a nice turn you did us, and so kind to you? What good have we now out of your journey to France? Never mind yet, you clown, but you'll pay us another time for this. Believe us, you'll repent it.' 'You'll have no good to get out of the young girl,' said the little man that was talking to him in the palace before that. And as he said the word, he moved over to her and struck her a slap on the side of the head. 'Now,' says he, 'she'll be without talk any more. Now, Guleesh, what good will she be to you when she'll be dumb? It's time for us to go, but you'll remember us, Guleesh.' When he said that, he stretched out his 2 hands, and before Guleesh was able to give an answer, he and the rest of them were gone into the rath out of his sight, and he saw them no more. He turned to the young woman and said to her, 'Thanks be to God, they're gone. Would you not sooner stay with me than with them?' She gave him no answer. 'There's trouble and grief on her yet,' said Guleesh in his own mind, and he spoke to her again. 'I am afraid that you must spend this night in my father's house, lady, and if there's anything that I can do for you, tell me, and I'll be your servant.' The beautiful girl remained silent, but there were tears in her eyes, and her face was white and red after each other. 'Lady,' said Guleesh, 'tell me what you would like me to do now. I never belonged at all to that lot of she-oaks who carried you away with them. I am the son of an honest farmer, and I went with them without knowing it. If I'll be able to send you back to your father, I'll do it, and I pray you make any use of me now that you may wish.' He looked into her face, and he saw the mouth moving as if she was going to speak, but there came no word from it. 'It cannot be,' said Guleesh, 'that you are dumb.' Did I not hear you speaking to the king's son in the palace tonight? Or has that devil made you really dumb when he struck his nasty hand on your jaw?' The girl raised her white smooth hand and laid her finger on her tongue to show them that she had lost her voice and power of speech, and the tears ran out of her eyes like streams, and Guleesh's own eyes were not dry, for as rough as he was on the outside, he had a soft heart and could not stand the sight of the young girl, and she in that unhappy plight. He began thinking with himself what he ought to do, and he did not like to bring her home with himself to his father's house, for he knew well that they would not believe him, that he had been in France and brought back with him the King of France's daughter, and he was afraid they might make a mock of the young lady or insult her. As he was doubting what he ought to do, and hesitating, he chanced to remember the priest. "Glory be to God," said he, "and I know now what I'll do. I'll bring her to the priest's house, and he won't refuse me to keep the lady and care for her." He turned to the lady again, and told her that he was loath to take her to his father's house, but that there was an excellent priest, very friendly to himself, who would take good care of her if she wished to remain in his house, but that if there was any other place she would rather go, he said he would bring her to it. She bent her head to show him she was obliged, and gave him to understand that she was ready to follow him any place he was going. "We will go to the priest's house then," said he. "He is under an obligation to me, and will do anything I ask him." They went together accordingly by the priest's house, and the sun was just rising when they came to the door. Guleesh beat it hard, and as early as it was that the priest was up, and opened the door himself. He wondered when he saw Guleesh and the girl, for he was certain that it was coming, waiting to be married as they were. "Guleesh, Guleesh, isn't it the nice boy you are, that you can't wait till 10 o'clock or 12, but that you must be coming to me at this hour looking for marriage, you and your sweetheart? You ought to know that I can't marry you at such a time, or at all events can't marry you lawfully. But Abou," said he suddenly, as he looked again at the young girl, "in the name of God, who have you here? Who is she, and how did you get her?" "Father," said Guleesh, "you can marry me or anybody else if you wish, but it's not looking for marriage I come to you now, but to ask, if you please, to give a lodging in your house to this young lady." The priest looked at him as though he had 10 heads on him, but without putting any other question to him, he desired him to come in, himself and the maiden, and when they came in he shut the door, brought them into the parlor, and put them sitting. "Now, Guleesh," said he, "tell me truly who is this young lady, and whether you're out of your senses really, or are only making a joke of me." "I'm not telling a word of lie, nor making a joke of you," said Guleesh, "but it was from the palace of the King of France I carried off this lady, and she is the daughter of the King of France." He began his story then, and told the whole to the priest, and the priest was so much surprised that he could not help calling out at times, or clapping his hands together. When Guleesh said from what he saw he thought the girl was not satisfied with the marriage, that he was going to take place in the palace before he and she hopes broken up, there came a red blush into the girl's cheek, and she was more certain than ever that she had sooner be as she was, badly as she was, than be married to the man she hated. When Guleesh said that he would be very thankful to the priest if he would keep her in his own house, the kind man said he would do that as long as Guleesh pleased, but he did not know what they ought to do with her, because they had no means of sending her back to her father again. Guleesh answered that he was uneasy about the same thing, and that he saw nothing to do but to keep quiet until they should find some opportunity of doing something better. They made it up then between themselves that the priest should let on that it was his brother's daughter he had, who had come on a visit to him from another country, and that he should tell everybody that she was dumb, and do his best to keep everyone away from her. They told the young girl what it was they intended to do, and she showed by her eyes that she was obliged to them. Guleesh went home then, and when his people asked him where he had been, he said that he had been asleep at the foot of a ditch, and had passed the night there. That's where we'll stop tonight, everyone. Tune in next time and we'll finish the story. Thank you all for listening to another episode of Candlelight Readings. I hope you have a restful sleep.